288 GTO, F40, F50, Enzo and LaFerrari. The greatest cars from possibly the greatest supercar maker of them all. As crazy as it might seem, the LaFerrari came out 11 years ago now, which means it's time for the next chapter in Ferrari's hypercar story. The expectations are through the roof, and competition from McLaren, Gordon Murray, Bugatti, Aston Martin and Mercedes has never been more fierce. Meet the F80.
Okay everyone, this is it, LaFerrari successor. Now it's called the F80, and straight off the bat, this thing doesn't have a V12. It's the first Ferrari hypercar not to have a V12 since the F40. It's got the V6 derived from the 499 hypercar project and the 296 as well. And it's a big change, isn't it? It's a big departure, half the cylinders of LaFerrari. But I don't know, I feel like with so many hypercars these days going for big capacity V12s, going all out, I feel like Ferrari should have been part of that gang, but we'll give it a chance. Of course we will. We'll drive it and we'll see what it's like. But for now, we're going to go through everything Ferrari has done to make this a true hypercar. So the name, F80, we've obviously had F40, F50, we skipped F60 and F70 with Enzo and LaFerrari, and it does feel like Ferrari's going for something a bit more extreme, you know, a bit more motorsport focused, because the LaFerrari was more of an experience car, you know, it wasn't four-wheel drive, a mega downforce monster, but this, I feel like it's more track focused, it's more serious, there's more motorsport tech in it. So obviously key to that is going to be the engine. Now it's the V6, 3 litres from the 499 Le Mans car, and also a relation to the 296 as well, but it's got more power. Of course it has. It's got 900 horsepower from the engine alone. So we're talking 300 horsepower per litre from this thing, which is just pretty mind-blowing. But this has 3 electric motors on top of that. Total output is 1200 horsepower. So in terms of specs, this thing is right up there with the W1. But I think what people are going to be really caring about is the noise and how the engine feels, how it sounds. And I think the LaFerrari is obviously dominated by that amazing V12. This is going to be something different. Is it going to be the same? Is it going to be better? I don't know. Again, we have to drive it, which we're really looking forward to.
Okay, it's not a V12, but if you've driven a 296 or heard one, you'll know that there are certain hints of V12 in the way that it sounds, and the F80's motor revs higher, up to 9,200 RPM, with new intake and exhaust cams, lighter internals, and higher combustion chamber pressures than the 296. This is the first turbocharged Ferrari hypercar since the F40, but it won't be a wild, boosty engine. Ferrari says it feels naturally aspirated, and the turbos use electric motors to keep lag to a minimum. It's just a shame you can't see the thing. It sits so low in the chassis because of the wide V-angle and a new smaller flywheel, so there was no point in having a glass engine lid.
So that's the engine, but for electric motors, we've got 2 at the front axle, 1 at the rear, just like the SF90, but these units are all new. They're designed and manufactured by Ferrari. They spin up to 30,000 RPM, which is just quite nuts. And obviously the front axle is going to be used for torque vectoring and to sort of work both tyres through a corner to get the car to hook up as best as it can. And we've driven SF90 quite a lot, and the early cars, they felt a bit disjointed and a bit hard to read when you start really leaning on them, because they're just so complex in terms of the electronics, whereas this, I think Ferrari's obviously had a lot more time to hone the systems, and there's loads of other electronic chassis systems on the car. They say it'll blend together to be a really nice, usable, approachable road car, if there ever could be such a thing that looks like this and has 1200 horsepower. But that's what we've got. We've got hybridity, but it's being used to make the car more performant, more capable on track. So Ferrari has said that there's no E-mode on this car. You can't drive it around on zero emissions electric mode, because the electric motors are just there to make you go faster. So aero is obviously a massive part of achieving that track performance, and just visually you can tell this thing is more extreme. It's got more holes in it than the LaFerrari did, and one of these is the S duct over here. So it channels air through this gap here over the top of the car, generates massive downforce. You've got this massive front wing, they call it, as well. But the key with this downforce is that you get 1,000 kilos at 155 miles an hour, same as the McLaren W1, but most of it is generated on the underside of the car to keep it looking relatively clean. clean. But the problem there is you need a really stable platform for the air to be clean and undisturbed and not doing weird things under the car when you're driving. So this has the same multimatic damping technology as you'll find on the Purosangue. So it's got spool dampers in essence, which sounds a bit complicated, but essentially it can chuck support at each corner whenever it needs it to keep the platform really level, really stable, and basically work the underfloor as hard as it can. So speaking of the diffuser, well, it's 1.8 meters long, which is about as tall as I am. Pretty insane. So Ferrari's actually angled the engine and gearbox upwards to give a steeper incline on the diffuser, make it work a bit harder. And it works with this wing. Now this is the first Ferrari hypercar since the F80 to have a fixed wing like this. And obviously it's active, it moves about, it's got a DRS function as well. But yeah, loads of aero going on this car, more than any other Ferrari in history. And it's all about that track performance, because now that it doesn't have a V12, I think this car needs a different USP. And it feels like Ferrari's going all in on the track capability to make this just an absolute weapon around a circuit. So all of this stuff, the dampers, the aero, the powertrain, it's all linked up by the car's internal brain. And essentially what it's trying to do is maximize the grip and performance of the tires at any given point in any condition. So it's measuring yaw, it's measuring steering angle, throttle position, you name it, and tweaking all the systems to deliver what you're asking the car to do. And that sounds really complicated, but if you've driven something like a 296, the results can be amazing. I mean, you can drive a 296 like a Toyota GR86, just chuck it around and play with it, even though it's an 800 horsepower car. And I think that's what Ferrari's going for with this. Amazing complexity underneath, but they're making it drivable. So I'm about to be one of the first people outside Ferrari to sit in this thing. So we've got butterfly doors like you got in the LaFerrari, and a pretty high sill actually. I've got a Lotus Elise myself, so I'm used to that. If we get in, I mean, straight away, it looks like the seat is really quite reclined. And they talk about this thing having a +1 seating layout, they call it. So essentially, it should feel like a single seater, but with an extra seat next to you. Not really sure what that means, but in essence, they're talking about the width of the cockpit, because like the LaFerrari, this cockpit is really narrow to help with the aero and to help channel air through to the rear wing and reduce drag. So when you're inside, it's really quite tight and cocooned, and you feel like you are close to the center line of the car. New wheel as well, which is rectangular. Not entirely sure about that one, but they say that this will come on future production Ferraris at some point. If you like modern Ferraris and how they work, you'll probably like this. I mean, I can take it or leave it. The touch controls can be a bit of a nightmare, but at least this time, Ferrari have listened, and you've got actual buttons to control phone and media and the screen in front of you and all that kind of stuff. And the passenger seat actually looks like it's part of the tub, whereas this, the driver's seat, is sort of separate and bolted on. It's just, it feels like a racing car. It feels like a racing car, and when you look at the windscreen, the way it curves around, you could be at Le Mans in this thing, quite conceivably.
The F80's carbon chassis is on show everywhere you look in here, and it's actually asymmetrical due to the different seating positions of the driver and passenger. Aluminium front and rear subframes are bolted to the tub, and stiffness is up by 50% compared to LaFerrari, even though the chassis is lighter. There's amazing detailing everywhere you look as well, like the brake cooling ducts flowing through the chassis structure and 3D printed wishbones that look like the bones of a prehistoric animal. At 1,525 kilos without fluids, the F80 is only about 55 kilos heavier than a 296, despite the extra hybrid hardware.
So if you want one, 3.6 million euros in Italy, including taxes. But even if you have that much money, you can't buy one, because all 799 are sold. Of course they are. Even so, it's just an amazing era for hypercars, isn't it? We've got this, we've got Aston Martin Valkyrie, AMG 1, Gordon Murray T50, and McLaren W1 as well. So that's going to be an amazing group test if we can get it done. I hope we can get it done, and I hope we can drive this thing soon.